Hey guys, have you guys read the article on the New Straits Times about SST and GST?
Yes, I did. Based on the new Straits Times article date 9 March 2024, Malaysia has used two tax systems in recent years, the Goods and Services Tax (GST) and the Sales and Services Tax (SST). GST started in 2015 but was later stopped in 2018. After that, the government brought back the SST system, which is still used today.
Oh, how was GST invented in the first place?
Let's begin with the GST implementation process. GST started on 1 April 2015. Businesses that earn more than 500,000 ringgit had to register. One of the important things about GST is that it was just at every level, from the factory to the shop. This means that was added at each step. Businesses were allowed to claim back tax on the things they bought, which is called input tax. But at the same time, they had to submit report to the government, either every month or every 3 months. So the process required more paperwork and tracking.
How about SST?
Okay, now we move to the SST implementation process. SST started again on 1 September 2018 after GST was removed. Unlike GST, SST only charged tax once, either at the factory level or at the service level. SST has two parts. The sales tax is either 5% or 10%, and the service tax is 6%. It is known to be easier to follow with less paperwork. However, under SST, businesses cannot claim back tax like the code with the GST. Jeha, can you explain to me the difference between GST and SST system in Malaysia?
Of course, so GST or Goods and Services Tax has a standard rate of 6% in Malaysia before it was abolished. It was implemented from 2015 until 2018 and then it was replaced by SST, which stands for Sales and Service Tax. Under SST, the sales tax is typically 5% or tax percent and the service tax is 6%. Now, in terms of price impact, GST could potentially reduce the cost of goods sold because businesses were allowed to claim input tax credit. However, with SST, that's not allowed. And this can be lead to a tax on tax situation, also known as a cascading effect, which may cause prices to increase. As for consumer, under GST, the tax amount was clearly shown on receipt. But with SST, the tax may or may not be displayed, especially for goods, since it usually already included in the final price you see. So that's the general difference. GST was more transparent and credit-based, while SST is simpler but can be less visible and sometimes more expensive.
Hey guys, which tax system yields higher revenue for the government?
As SST is a single stage tax applied either at the manufacturing level or when a service is provided, it's relatively simple, but it has a major downside, which is it may result in double taxation. GST, on the other hand, is multi-stage tax. It's applied at every stage of production and distribution, but business can claim tax on input. That helps eliminate the problems of double taxation and make the system more transparent. Under SST, the estimated revenue in 2020 was 26.7 billion ringgit. However, when GST was in place, the government collected 44 billion ringgit in 2017.
Wow, that's a big difference.
It really is. That's almost 18 billion ringgit more with GST. From a revenue perspective, GST is a clearly better for the government.
How do GST and SST affect consumer price?
Since businesses cannot get back the tax they pay on inputs, they simply add that cost into the price of the final product, causing consumer price increase. Under GST, businesses can use the input tax credit (ITC) system. This means that if a business pays tax on materials or service it buys, it can claim the amount back when it files its GST return. This will result in lower costs for businesses and lower price for consumers. Kisha, I don't understand. GST is more efficient than SST, but why did the government choose SST over GST?
True, GST is more efficient, But the government had several reasons for choosing SST. Firstly, SST has simpler system. It's only changed at one stage, either manufacturing or services, which makes it easier to manage and less complicated for business, especially for the smaller ones. Also, SST put less burden on consumers, unlike GST, which was charged on almost every item including daily essentials. SST is more selective, so the impact on cost of living feels lower, especially for the lower income groups. Then there's public perception. When GST was first introduced, many people complained that GST was seen as a cause of raising living costs. So the return to SST was aimed at easing public dissatisfaction. Because of that, keeping SST became a political decision. During the election, the government promised to abolish GST and followed through to keep public trust. And lastly, although GST can generate more money, SST gives the government sufficient revenue to manage national expenses. It may not be as high, but it is enough for now. So all these reasons combined, the government decided to stick with SST for now.
So, in conclusion, both GST and SST have their own processing and ways to implementation. GST was more detailed, while SST is simple and still used until today.
In short, GST was more details and showed tax clearly, but it was removed. SST is simpler and still used now, but this tax is not always showed and can make things more expensive.
Overall, GST is more efficient than SST as it reduces consumer price and brings in higher revenue for the government.
Alright, from my explanation just now, we can see that GST is more efficient in generating national expenses. However, government continues to implement the SST. This is because the SST is easier to manage, less burdensome to consumers, meets political promise, gives the government enough revenues.